Awesome. Take it away, Sujith. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Let me quickly pull up the slides. Great. Oops. Yeah. Just want to do a quick check to see if the slides are coming through.
Yep.
Excellent. So thank you, Al, once again, and thank you, Liz, for being kind enough to invite me and the idea of Beckn into the Metagov family for this conversation and hopefully many more conversations in the space. I know we have very few people on this call. So, Andre, pleasure meeting you. Steve, nice to meet you too. Liz, of course, and Sneha. So we can probably keep this as interactive as possible. I'll quickly walk you through the idea of backend over the next probably 10, 15, 20 minutes, but feel free to stop and ask me as many questions because this is something that uh, is more felt than understood in some sense. And I think the work we're doing with Beck in the last 6 years have kind of transcended our thinking in many ways. But one undeniable fact of what we do is that networks do solve for some of the biggest problems that we're trying to look at solving. And then I'll give you sort of a spread of the problems that today open networks currently is sort of addressing or attempting to address across diverse set of spaces, and how we serendipitously arrived at these solves with Beckn, although Beckn was intended to do something very specific, something very relatively silly at some point when we thought about it. But as the world and universe would conspire, we see ourselves doing a bunch of things with Beckn 6 years later. So very excited about it. The best way for me to introduce myself would be to see me as technologist, but not like a conventional technologist of somebody who builds platforms, but somebody who's like more like a digital plumber. The parts that many people don't get to see, the underlying infrastructure. But when I say this infrastructure, I mean digital, but digital more from protocols and standards that kind of wires and connects the different systems together, and not the usual, the AI or the cloud or the hardware kind of infrastructure. So I'm more of a protocol builder, plumber in that sense. And I had the good fortune of co-creating this idea of Beckn as an open source protocol in 2018 and 19. And This was part of a mission by itself. Beckn as a vision and a mission had that kind of a start in 2019, but today it's kind of transcended into something bigger, at least in my own eyes, from being just Beckn to what we are now calling ourselves as Networks for Humanity. NFH. And NFH has been an avatar of our work, a moment in our journey in the last 2 years where we are making this aspiration to build digital infrastructure at a much wider scale, both in terms of um, sectors and geography, and also in terms of the possible scope of how we think about networks fundamentally beyond what Beckn fundamentally addresses. So we set up as a network of labs across the world with good presence in Bangalore, but we are setting up an office here in San Francisco. In fact, I'm working out of that location in Los Altos. We're not exactly San Francisco. And then, of course, we do have a small unit in New York, Singapore, and Zug in Germany. We are set up as a lab, not as an office, in the sense that we do think most of our work is in the realm of rapid experimentations. But we do believe that experimentations for us is objectively and obsessively focused on building out those experiments and deploying them at population scale. And as founders of Networks for Humanity, that is me, Nandan Nilekani, kind of a big name back in India, Pramod Verma, again a big name back in India, and Siddharth Shetty. Four of us have had the again, the good fortune of building population scale systems back in India since 2010, whether it's the ID system that has scaled up to 1.4 billion people, or the payment rails that does 25 billion transactions a month, and various such population scale infrastructure across the country. And so we're bringing that sort of a playbook of building population scale, decentralized digital infrastructure as an imagination as part of Networks for Humanity, and bringing that this way of thinking to the rest of the world. Also because of the interest and excitement we have received ever since the G20 and other forums where they've started where our work in India was getting noticed, and there was this expectation to kind of take this work to Africa, to Europe and a few other places, and that's how we thought about putting Networks for Humanity as a foundation. It's about 2 years old, maybe less than 2 years, but fundamental focus is to build open, interoperable digital infrastructure, and more so now because we believe, as much as there is uh, great concerns around AI and AI-based adoptions, we think that if done well with digital infrastructure and interoperable architectures, we think it can unlock agency in a different way. And we fundamentally think about, therefore, an AI native decentralized economy where we put people, communities, and small businesses in the center. Not the tech, not the platform, not the models, but put them in the center and give them agency, dignity, and choice. That's essentially what we are focusing on as Networks for Humanity. And Beckn is one of the two core missions. The other one being Finternet. With Beckn, we are thinking about how we think about moving value peer-to-peer, where the agency moves to the edges. If there's a provider of value and a consumer of value, can they discover themselves directly without an intermediary or a big platform aggregator in the center? I think we are at a stage with evolution in technology, protocols, cryptography, tokenization, and a few others where such a possibility can be imagined. And it's actually no different from how we think about internet fundamentally. So Beckn looks at a vision of moving value peer to peer, where agency and power remains at the edges. And Finternet is to make the value, which is largely illiquid even in today's world, make it liquid through tokenization. So Finternet is an architecture that looks at all economic asset classes, from land, like registered assets, to securities, regulated assets, to personal assets like my home battery or my car, or my paintings, and think about a universal tokenization architecture, not a technology, but more of an architecture of how we can tokenize value and give it back to the people, and see what they can do with that value. For example, the proof of, as a farmer, if I have a proof of inventory through a warehouse receipt, and if I can make it digitally represented well, verifiable digital proof that can now help me get faster loans, then that's a tokenized asset that unlocks agency for the farmer. So for us, we think about tokenization at a more foundational level. So backend moves value peer to peer, internet tokenizes value, and we're bringing these together to create a digital infrastructure for value exchange at a humanity scale. So this is a global effort, and these are further underpinned by a few trust infrastructure with decentralized directories and open credentials. But again, probably this is one of the least, or most the tech content in the conversation I'll have today. But this is broadly the two core missions on which we are focusing our efforts on. Now, diving into Beckn and the inspiration for Beckn, um, I think back in 2018, when we were shaping up this digital infrastructure at a population scale in India, we realized that most of the trade, commerce, and the more commercial side of the digital economy were driven by this very obvious structures where we have these consumers and providers being onboarded onto those massive centralized platforms. And I think, as the title on the slide obviously calls out, either of these platforms operate in isolated trenches. I mean, think for a moment. Like, for example, if I need a ride, I go on a particular ride-hailing platform. If I'm looking for a doctor for a teleconsultation, particularly during COVID, I would have to go on another different platform, another platform for my hotel bookings and a bunch of other stuff, so commerce and all that matter. And we realized that there are two or three fundamental systemic risks in this design by the very nature of it. One is that you are expecting both the provider and the consumer of value to be on the same platform all the time. That's one, which means that if both of them are not on the same platform, you can't discover each other, trust each other, and transact with each other, exchange value. The second systemic risk is you're talking about an incentive alignment, not just between the value provider and the value consumer, but also in the intermediary. And sometimes these incentives don't get aligned, as you could see with some of these dark patterns of e-commerce and others that we have seen where uh, the intermediary is actually storing value and extracting more value than actually enabling a more seamless flow of value between the edges, between the provider and consumer. And the third is this model that you have an aggregator does not scale at population scale. You can't expect one provider to have all the supply side and the demand side on one platform at that scale. And then this is where we realize that this way of building, where you need an intermediary in the center as a way to sort of a value to be discovered, provided, exchanged between two parties, may not be the right way to think about driving penetration of access to markets, access to credit, access to skills and opportunities, if you have to think about at a population scale. And we were initially thinking about answering this only for the mobility sector. We're thinking about how do we bring the multiple forms of transport together and make it available seamlessly to the user, to the rider, without having to hop across multiple different transport or ride-hailing platforms to just find an answer to the question of how do I go from A to B. It started from there, but we see that this pattern seems to be repeating itself across multiple sectors, from ride hailing to retail, commerce, healthcare, and beyond. So we said, what does it mean to think differently about this matter? And we didn't really look forward. We just had to look back and ask ourselves, uh, how did things how were things built at a humanity scale prior to the whole platform economy? If you look at the idea of internet itself, it's not that I expect to be on the same browser on the same device all the time, and so is the provider. It was always decentralized. It was all people were disconnected. There's no compulsion that I have to use a particular type of phone to access a website or a service provider online. So internet is built that way. Similarly, is the case with emails today. I could be on Gmail. Val, you could be on Hotmail, and we can still exchange emails. There was no expectation that both of us need to use the same email program to exchange emails. There was absolutely nothing. There was no compulsion that we both have to use the same emails. And same is the case with telecom networks. I could be on a local India operator, and you could be on AT&T, and we could still make calls without having to be on the same network provider or telco provider. So this idea of, therefore, not having to be on the same sort of an provider's infrastructure, intermediaries infrastructure, was never part of the design. And it was never part of the design because fundamentally things were built interoperably. All of them spoke to each other in a language. For emails, there was SMTP. For web, we have, of course, TCP/IP, HTTP, and all. But surprisingly, for value exchange, there was no such protocol, which was simple and obvious enough, like the email protocols that was built. And that pretty much created the idea of Beckn. So Beckn was a very simple idea that if you're a consumer or a buyer of value, you should be on one node of your choice, and you should be able to naturally discover any provider on the network without having to be on the same sort of interface as the providers, just like emails. And that thought led to this idea of creating a language for value exchange, a language for transactions that does a buyer discovering a provider, trusting the provider, having sort of a contracting, negotiation, ordering sort of an exchange, and then tracking it to fulfillment. So this discover, order, fulfillment, post fulfillment, sort of the four beats of a transaction or a value exchange, is something which we thought should be represented as a universal vocabulary, which any platform should be able to adopt, and thus create a network of platforms that can talk to each other without having to have one platform in the center. This fundamental idea is what led to creation of Beckn. And today, we think that, and I'll come back to these examples, that this way of thinking could unlock how we think about markets, how we think about value exchange, how we think about ride hailing, how we think about even energy transactions differently. So in the last 5, 6 years, we have made some progress with this idea. We are practitioners. We have a very strong bias for action. And I'm not like a researcher in the space. I'm more of a practitioner. My job is to get the systems up and running. So with that effort and with a very active conversation across civil society, market players, governments, we are able to now build out an ecosystem in India and other parts of the world, which is actually doing peer-to-peer value exchange at a reasonable scale. So in commerce, for example, we have about close to 800,000 sellers who are doing about 25 million transactions a month across retail, grocery, artisan commerce, agriculture, financial services, mutual funds. Some of these financial services, so like a $1 loan, are all getting sort of executed as transactions on an open network built with Beckn protocol, and it's one of the largest networks we have built so far. It's called Open Network for Digital Commerce, ONDC. We have crossed more than 460 million transactions in the last 4 5 years across 500 plus cities in India, and yeah, it's a cross sector economy, but completely decentralized. Think of India having its own internet for commerce, and that's pretty much how ONDC has evolved. Then in the ride hailing space, we have it's fascinating story of how we have over, I think, 500,000 drivers who have probably now received rides, 800,000 drivers who now receive rides without an intermediary. There's no Uber or Ola in between. It's peer to peer, and with no intermediary, and therefore our entire ride revenue goes to them. There's no commission being set up in place. So therefore, as a peer-to-peer mobility, $280 million of driver earnings have reached the driver. And while we started this as a ride hailing, we brought this ride hailing peer-to-peer system called Namayatri and ONDC. We combine those two together to create a multimodal transit ecosystem in India, which means transit systems, the metro rail systems, the city bus providers, all of them are now just nodes on the network. They just provide their inventory from the supply side. Any consumer app, it could be a Venmo, it could be a WhatsApp, a chatbot on WhatsApp, or it could be Google Maps, now source this inventory from each of these providers and stitch a ride, a multimodal ride for the end user without anybody being in the center. And without one central platform, we are able to stitch these rides and make that journeys possible. So 100% of India's metro rail ticketing is now live on this network. And we have similar examples in agriculture and energy. And so that's broadly how you should probably think about Beckn. Now, what does it mean for Jacob, Shanti, William, and Maya? Is this. So if you fundamentally think about them, the idea is that they need something which they're looking for, or they have something to offer. How do the I haver and the I needer discover each other, trust each other, and exchange value without having to depend upon a big intermediary in the center? How can they unlock agency and discover value or provide value on their own terms? If that's available, if there was an infrastructure, a surface that was available for them to make themselves present and be universally discoverable for giving or receiving value. You have this decentralized, networked value exchange economy, and that's how Ashanti, for example, for disparate needs, as a EV, taxi driver, auto rickshaw driver, who has needs going from for finding rides to finding charging stations to finding loans or insurance or scholarships for her child, all of these diverse needs, instead of being on different platforms, can she be available on one node, and these services find her as much as she reaches out to access these services and find these services? So that's this natural zero marginal cost of discovery, zero marginal cost of trust and transaction, of making this value exchange happen is essentially the idea. So for our work in Kenya, in Kuza, or in Uttar Pradesh, one of the largest states in the country, on agriculture, we think that we can make farmers find better prices in the market, find buyers further away from their local marketplaces where they can get a better purchase, find cold storages on their own, or even between farmers to rent their idling equipments so that they don't have to probably rent it from some costly providers, even for them to self-organize their own capacities of usage of equipments, sort of becomes a more self-organizing value exchange ecosystem. So that's pretty much how we're thinking about it. We think networks give you what do you call reduces the access barrier and the trust barrier. But now with the whole agentic AI as an agency moved to the edges, Jacob, Shanti, Maya can now have the capacity to not get into this complexity of getting onto a network and searching and discovering themselves, but instead speak in their native language to an agent and do the work. So even the execution barrier, capacity to execute, is also taken away if you overlay AI on these open rails without letting AI or the AI model providers or inference providers to run it on their own terms rather than the terms of Jacob or Shanti or Maya. So that's pretty much how we're thinking about it. And we have scenarios where a farmer today in Uttar Pradesh gets crop advisory, gets market linkage access, find better buyers, but also able to sell power from his rooftop solar when he's away from home to the best buyer on the network. So we have peer-to-peer energy trading in India, where the farmer does not have to become this sort of like a energy trader sitting in front of a terminal, but just speaking in his local native language, saying, "Can I get more additional income from the idling solar energy when I'm not at home?" And then there's this agent sort of figuring out who the best buyer on the other side. It may not be the local utility, it could be someone else, maybe a mill worker, a mill operator on the other side who may probably want a cheaper energy, can actually place the bid and buy it from the energy from this farmer. And all he has to do is to just set it up on this open network. So from at farmer advice to energy transactions, all on one universal network protocol, peer-to-peer transaction protocol, that is Beckn, and bringing this cross-sector, cross-jurisdiction ecosystem together, ultimately unlocking agency to people at the edges. That's pretty much how I would want you to think about Beckn. But yeah, these are some of the frames I wanted to open up and see if this is kind of creating a few thoughts, reflections in your mind. And of course, happy to answer any questions you may have on this one. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Cool. Thank you so much, Sujith. And yeah, I think some questions that are coming up in chat. I'm curious about the technical side, and I guess some more of the
Yeah.
information into the protocol. So is Beckon itself a peer-to-peer protocol? And does it interoperate with existing decentralized protocols like I don't know, IPFS, or there's like the Fediverse, or what kind of existing I
Let me see those
just
data structures.
Yes. So, no, absolutely. So, backend fundamentally is technology agnostic. It is more of a semantic expression. The data structures are fundamentally do not presume or any underlying blockchain or infrastructure. So, which means it is fairly the data structures can be overlaid. We have done this on chain. We have done this on the classic internet with API specifications. So, backend does not presume that. So, technically, therefore it can be executed on any transport protocol that is available. It's fully open source. You should definitely take a look at our specifications. Um, I'm just going to put that here, put them here. Everything is available on GitHub, but this is an easier way to find the documentation. We're calling it the fabric.nfs.global, which also carries the underlying specifications because we have implemented our own network runtime as a global, think of a global backend internet runtime, which we're calling as the NFS fabric. But anybody can take this protocol and get instantiated. And what is cool with the version 2 that we announced 6 months ago is you can bring your own third party data structures to represent a catalog of value, whether it's energy or whether it's healthcare services or retail. You can attach your own third party data structures as a way of defining your payload on backend, because backend is pretty light that way. It does not assume um, what kind of a value you're trying to move on top. It could be an energy accounting, it could be ride hailing, it could be anything. But and you can bring your own data structures with V2. With the recent advancement in JSON LD, it makes it much easier to do that. So that's pretty much how we're thinking about backend.
So when you say you can bring your own data structures, you're saying you can add extra fields to your data structures, essentially?
More than yeah, you can link data structures. For
Oh,
example, I
yeah,
can
so you can do pointers, right? Sure.
That's right. Yeah. So I can probably link schema.org or orange button or green button specs or the OCPI data structure. So EV charging, we actually use the European OCPI standards for building a nationwide EV charging network. So backend didn't create its own EV charging sort of schemas. We just use the one that's available and we overlaid it as a catalog description for the underlying backend transaction payload.
and then
So the
Liz,
payload and the instructions are separate. Got it.
Yeah.
your question on identity and recovery of identity.
Well, it sounds like, thank you so much, Sujith. It's really
Yeah.
incredible to hear about the reach of the projects that you're bringing to humanity. And I'm going to assume that Beckn doesn't require any particular kind of identity, but I'm wondering when we're seeing pictures of the beneficiaries of this network, people who maybe haven't been digital before, um, how are they experiencing usability and any need to recover things when things go wrong?
Great question. So you're right. So backend fundamentally does not. Um, the way to think about backend is it's fundamentally about exchanging value, and it does not come in. It does not have an opinion about how you identify the provider and consumers of value. So I could be, for example, using my WhatsApp as my platform where I've identified myself with my phone number, for example, and over a WhatsApp, and I can probably do a discovery transaction, which is what we have done in India. We have some of the distributors on WhatsApp as enabled by Meta to bring some chatbot experiences for a farmer to just through WhatsApp ask the question and then just broadcast that search onto the network. And then the platform, which is in this case WhatsApp, controls the identity and decides how to sort of share that identity onto the network. So the network does not itself have an ID infrastructure, issuance, or acceptance. It just allows the nodes to discover the provider and the consumer ID the way they think it's appropriate. For example, or I could build a system where I'm just using my driver license as a way of verification, or I can create my own DID and make it available, or I probably keep my ID completely anonymous. What is important here, though, is that the when the two when the matchmaking happens between a provider of a certain catalog and inventory and the consumer is having these terms organized as a micro contract. Beckn expresses a very clear terms of exchange of how I want to consume or how I want to provide, and all the terms, whether it's payment, cancellations, fulfillment, all those things factor. And At some point, as part of fulfillment, if you need the identity of the person to be revealed, then that's a choice the consumer can have to provide. I'll give you an example of this to just think about it in a bit more, in a more visceral sense. Let's say you have a, a, a woman in the night looking for a taxi ride. As a woman, I would not want to disclose my location and identity in the night to a taxi driver till actually I make the booking, and probably the taxi driver is probably at a very close proximity at the time of pickup. Till that time, I would like to shield or mask my identity. So the platform from which I am making that booking should be able to provide that safety to me, yet should be able to allow me to make that booking transaction and have the right fulfilled. So these are some of the things that Beckn protocol leaves it to the top and allows it to be orchestrated in a more useful ways for the user than just presupposing them with a universal identity system that the Beckn itself mandates. So that's how we do the separations here. I can probably use my Venmo ID to do transaction. I can use my email address to do transactions. Beckn does not have an opinion on how you express that identity as a consumer or as a provider on the system. You still can, however, receive, for example, as a taxi driver, you can receive ratings against your identity. And those ratings and feedback are actually portable. I can take it from the platform from where I'm receiving it. Like if I'm connected through Uber, I can take my ratings and take it to another platform and continue from there.
In
And
a
it will
verifiable form.
in a
In other words,
verifiable form. That's right.
so you have a cryptographic identifier tied to each rating that can confirm that it came from that platform.
That is correct. And
Okay,
every rating is digitally signed and is issued as a verifiable credential. You can put that data. It's signed by the platform. It's countersigned by the rider side platform. So every transaction is countersigned. So you have these reputations are not faked, and it's backed by a right transactions. All those are verifiable.
all right. As someone who's literally working on exactly the same thing that you are, good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're doing the exact that we have very redundant work at Trust over IP going on. Though I don't know the scope, and that's why I'm wondering. We're trying to handle more generally than financial transactions, these sorts of things through agents and
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
unified agent stack. So
I agree, and I would love to know more about that, Steve.
okay.
But I think the way we think about it is we separate these lanes. For example, for Beckn, it's downright silly to the extent of saying defining the value exchange. Okay, and you bring your own trust infrastructure to it. When we implemented our own Fabric runtime for the network, we have built our own decentralized directory as a way to register the nodes who transact. So
Yeah, I mean, as long as each user can build their own trust
yeah,
architecture, then you and I are talking about the same thing. Yeah,
that's right. And so long as they are portable, verifiable, I think we're good to
exactly.
get going on Beckn. Yes.
All right, you're saying the magic words.
Yeah.
Wow,
And then
incredible.
in some places in India, I mean, we leave it to the regulators to sort of take those calls. In some places, for example, they want, in India, where there is an ONDC, it's sort of like a semi-open permission network. The only permissioning they do is based on the KYB, the Know Your Business, to see if you're registered in India to be on the platform. So there are some checks that comes from a governance point of view. Architecturally, the platform is neutral, but governance does do sort of the governance checks of onboarding, proven trusted providers onto the network and also the platform. So those are overlaid as rails on the network, but the architecture itself does not impose any.
So
Yeah, I don't trust the government, but the basic underlying protocol is good. I mean, literally, I'm trying to fight a bill in the Senate right now, so
Yeah.
which is overextending, this certification and when it should be handled by,
Yeah.
individuals associating voluntarily and or industry groups. Anyway,
Yeah, and it's also whether we trust or not, sometimes governments may not even have the capacity to govern. So in places we can have the
that's what I'm saying.
cooperatives can kind of create the self-governing trust on top of this network. We have a permissionless network of 94 such companies in energy startups who come together to create a unified energy interface. They own define their own local self-governance, and they kind of like they have their own club rules and participation and kind of build and do this in a
Yeah,
very
we call those verifiable trust communities over trust over IP. Yeah.
yeah,
Like I said, there's a lot of one-to-one analogies here.
that's right. Yeah.
hello to everybody. I have a question. I'm Andrew from Ukraine. I'm new to your community, so just come on, heard it from the scratch. And what I hear is this is something that can replace the money. So if it will be scalable to the maximum scale, money doesn't need it.
So what, I mean, I'm not too sure about that, Andy, in the sense that we talk about exchanging value more from goods and services and not, for example, Beckn protocol doesn't come in the way of how you will attach it to other payment rails. Beckn by itself does not have the payment rails. It does not define the money. It doesn't issue or accept money. It's more of a peer-to-peer contracting, negotiating, and fulfillment infrastructure. Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, but we use money to do that for now.
Yeah. Yeah, in the sense, yes. You can say that for sure. Now, it is possible, it is quite possible that we have a network which comes up with its own sort of a money-like currency. We can call it loyalty points or whatever, which some of the networks are doing, and tokenize it and say, okay, we will exchange on this form of currency alone, or this form of loyalty alone, and do this. The question is then, how do you off ramp it for the network to actually convert it to real money or not? So that's where there are a few things that needs to be thought through. But yeah, within this network, people just want to just deal with a sort of currency that is exchangeable for them. Quite possible to do that. Yes. Would
And
it?
if the community don't want to use the money and just want to use the system to exchange the goods, so this is it is possible as I see.
Yes, I mean, barter is definitely possible, but again, we go with the same issue of coincidence of wants. For example, your 5 minutes of your tractor being lent to me may not be the same as me giving you 10 units of solar energy. So how do you get that equations right, and how do you even agree on that? How do you build a consensus on that? So that's a barter system has that problem. But yes, if everybody says 5 units of your energy cost me $10 and my rent for a tractor for hour is $10, so the money makes that much simpler that way. Yes.
Thanks.
Henry, great background, great setting. I wish I was there.
Welcome to Ukraine.
Yes.
I see Val has some sorry, what was that?
Yeah, I was just going through the questions myself. Should I go through them one by one in the chat?
Yes, if I can add into the first one,
Yeah.
an appreciation of your track record. Like you said, you were part of the was it Aadhaar, the identity
Yep. That's right.
system? That is a truly impressive process. I'd be interested if you would talk a little bit about your journey, like learnings you took
Yeah.
from these big population scale rollouts. And
Yeah.
yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. So yeah, so ever since I've been on the platform building side for a long time before, walked into Aadhaar project. And like any typical government ID project, I thought it would work in a very, very stereotypical way. But what was fascinating about Aadhaar was it was not trying to do a lot. It kind of said we will only build the plain unassuming infrastructure with just two things. How do we identify somebody uniquely without calling that person a citizen or attaching any entitlement or benefits? Just identify that person and let that person be, you know, identified accurately every time the person wants to be identified for whatever reasons, unbeknownst to the infrastructure. So that form of building an infrastructure, not a system, was kind of a revelation, and very interesting how that journey has made us think about scale, doing this at scale. Um, I said, it's one is to scale what works is a general thing that me as an engineer is ingrained to think about. But when you think about population scale and with the diversity and complexity that it brings, especially in a country like India, you don't think about scaling what works, but you think about what works at scale. Because when you have to think about what works at scale, you probably have to think of building only what is necessary and not what is sufficient. Because you can never ever think about reaching every form of contextual diversities and changes yourself. So the way you think about it is build this very minimal, absolutely minimal set of a digital footprint that is as universal as possible, as unassuming as possible, as unopinionated as possible, and then allow that to create an open playground for people to build contextual solutions for the diversity they are dealing with. Which is what I said, you're enabling a forest and not building a curated garden. And this way of thinking about what works at scale, where you build a very minimal, only the very necessary, never think about building the whole sufficient idea, just building the very necessary as building blocks. But each building block itself works at population scale in its minimalistic design. But let somebody else put these building blocks together to create something on top of it. For example, banks took the ID infrastructure, just the two API underlying building block, and created an eKYC for reducing the KYC cost for people to get access to banking. And banking regulators and the banking ecosystem actually could increase the access to banking in India. It went from 18% in 2008 and 9, and iPhone is out, and India is still at 18% banking penetration. From 18%, it could go literally up to 85% in about 10 years because the cost of KYC just plummeted by order of 100. And just because of the eKYC was imagined as an idea on top of the ID, because ID gave you just basically four fields, and each of these four fields come verified, and the regulator said, oh, that's good enough to get me a no-frill account and a basic KYC check done. And for other banking products, I can probably do a more advanced KYC. But with the basic KYC, I should be able to get 800 million people a bank account. So this form of imagination on top of the underlying infrastructure is the reason why I think it kind of naturally accelerated the adoption of this across diverse use cases, and each of them was done by the ecosystem. We call it the ecosystem thinking, where the ecosystem is building solutions on top of this infrastructure, and you're not building it yourself. So that's what I call as think differently about what works at scale vis-a-vis scaling what works. Because scaling what works assumes that you know exactly how things will pan out at that scale and at that complexity. The other part of our thinking, the learning has been that to be less, we are accustomed to building this rigid, purpose-specific infrastructure. Even if we're building infrastructure minimalistically, we build it very purpose-specific. For example, if there was no backend, and if you were to still think about building protocols, we would have had one protocol for energy transaction, another protocol for EV charging, and another protocol for financial services, another for retail. So we would have built purpose specific. It's as if like we are building a road for every car. So one of our learnings that we wanted to say is to build it more purpose generic. infrastructure more universal, that can unlock multiple sectors, multiple use sectors. So think cross-sector, cross-jurisdictional as a way of building an infrastructure. One, you're building one common highway instead of building a road for every car, but it also allows for this combinatorial unlocks, the spillovers to happen quite naturally. And that's why Beckn, although it started as a ride-hailing protocol, we discovered this deeper truth of abstraction in the design and said, maybe we should go from ride as a specific value to be moving on this protocol to any value, any form of value. And that universal thinking is pretty much at the crux of why we are setting up networks for humanity and building this universal infrastructure, which is cross-sector, cross-jurisdiction in its applicability. Now, of course, if you're using it in financial services for equities, instead of stock exchanges, can you use Beckn to trade equities? Yeah, sure, you can. But then, of course, the regulators, capital markets regulator would have a point of view on how to do it, how much to do it. But these are questions more of governance. But the underlying tech should be made available even for such possibilities tomorrow. And it is, I mean, think about a taxi driver who wants to invest in, let's say, shares and have his own wealth creation. He cannot buy like a 0.1% of a Tesla stock, which he can afford. It's not available, and he cannot buy it when the markets are down. I mean, he's probably probably frees. He's free only in the evenings to sort of think about investments, and by the time the markets are shut, how does he have the agency to participate? So these are some of the ways in which we are bringing even regulators to think in a very tech forward way. So some of our work with Finternet, with Cambridge University, Center for Digital Innovation and Regulations, is sort of making even the regulators now think with this sort of in universal infrastructure to think in a very tech forward way to see what more can happen rather than, being scared or worried or staying away from this idea. So like, and how do you embrace tokenization, protocolization, miniaturization, generalization as fundamental key aspects of design of how you build future regulations in a tech forward way. So these are some of the things that we have learned and we're trying to adopt. And don't do anything more than what is necessary, absolutely necessary. So we think about what not to do as much as what we want to do. And that's probably one of those important design choices we tend to make in the things we build.
Sujit, and you were talking about scales. That was brilliant. What works on scale, not the scale what works.
Yeah.
And can you elaborate on scales? I heard through your presentation is individual, population, and humanity. What
Yeah.
are more scales? What it can be? How do you see it?
So for me, scale, I mean, I think about scale, but not in terms of the population that you're trying to sort of the intent to serve with infrastructures, but also about scale of value itself. I believe we are in a time where newer forms of value can be made available to people at the edges. I think it's very well. For example, if I take energy, the fact that a home battery is not just for self-use, but I can tokenize it and make it available for somebody else to store energy and make some money out of it. That's an asset. That's an income generating asset that is still not brought into the mainstream economy and virtualized enough and all against which I can get a loan or I can get an insurance or I can find buyers on that. So finding and unlocking new forms of value, new asset classes that can actually be more liquid in the digital arena than in the physical world. That is also as for me a vector of scale. The other vector of scale for me is to combine all these together to do something more for Jacob or Shanti, the farmer or the driver, to do much more. The how do you bring that diversity of experiences and unlocks for a person for making the person who the person is, for just being who you are, just having the agency that you already have? Can I unlock more? So I think about scale in those dimensions, but It is useful to think of scale also as population because it gives you an opportunity to rapidly, sort of create these cost curve declines on trust, discoverability, transaction cost. And for me, that rapid decline of cost unlocks whole new value. Today, I mean, in India, peer-to-peer energy trading is something that could never have happened if we were not thinking about this design that works at scale. So those are why, for me, scale is central to how we think about networks and how we think about unlocking diversified forms of value to a very diversified sort of ecosystem of participants. And diversity and scale are sort of, for me, sort of like an interchangeable sort of considerations of design. I mean, for example, how would I know healthcare services to be delivered in let's say in remote parts of India is different from the way I would offer in say Colorado. There's a completely, so for example, assisted healthcare could do wonders across Africa and India. We have youth entrepreneurs, we call them agripreneurs in Kenya, who are connected to this network, but act as the feet on the street, who take these agriculture services to the farmers who are not digitally connected. So even when the farmer is not digitally connected, hooked onto this network, there are these other people who can connect to this network and take these services in the physical world to the farmer and literally in their farms or in their sheds and have conversation with them. And those are the possibilities for me that scale thinking brings.
Thanks.
This is fantastic. We are almost at time, so I guess I have a forward-looking question to say, might there be somebody from the Networks for Humanity team who could join Metagov for a deep dive? Maybe we work up a little project together on how this approach could apply to governance contexts where people need to talk to each other. We're working on a distributed deliberation standard. Just set up our first community group with the W3C, and yeah, would like to be in a thinking space with you.
Absolutely. And, Sneha is here on the call. Sneha, since you've been, transcending both these ecosystems, you could be the bridge. You could be the ambassador from both sides to sort of take these conversations forward. And Sneha can bring in either me or some of our other colleagues into the conversation based on the specific context and the use case you have. She also has access to the protocol team, the protocol engineers, in case any specific technical questions, in case you want to build up a test network on our fabric. There are people who can help you with that to simulate a scenario that you're thinking about, Liz. Yeah,
Great.
so maybe I can, with Neha's permission, ask Neha to be the point of coordination for both of us. Yeah.
Fantastic. It'd be great to follow up with you, Sneha. And we're working on a conference to happen in New York in late fall.
That'll be
Yes,
fantastic.
I'll just drop you a message on Slack, Liz,
Okay,
in the Telegram
thanks.
channel. Yeah,
See you there.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Sneh is doing some incredible work on arbitration. And we think open networks is a great way to, I call it it's not just I mean, it's the speed of justice, especially when you're talking about cross-party transactions, which kind of create a major blockade for exchange of value, especially for farmers to participate in cross-border transactions.
Okay, give me links to that right now. The arbitration stuff. That's where I'm starting. Go. Give me a link.
Oh, okay, calm down. Sorry,
Okay.
Sujith, can you complete your sentence, please?
Yes. No, so these are, I mean, I was saying that, I mean, I'm learning from Sneha herself. So Sneha has all the full command on how she's visualizing Beckn for decentralized arbitration. So Sneha, you should definitely walk the community through your work and see where this is. Look like Steve would be very interested in knowing that. So you should share your notes with Steve already. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, one of the things I did was DAO-based cross-border arbitrations, which is part of the Metagov DAO Star fellowship. So I think that's already in the channel, but I will share more resources there.
Excellent.
Wait a minute, which channel am I looking in?
On the Metagov chat, in the Metagov group, I'll just share it there.
Oh, okay. So okay.
Yeah.
I can
Okay.
start a thread based on this seminar in the seminar channel so we can have continued discussions right in the thread in the seminar channel. And any links, like maybe I saw Andre asked about the presentation link, Sujith, if you have that and are willing to share so we
Oh,
can dive
yes.
deeper into it. Okay, so yeah, we can share links like in that thread, and then if there are other ways to keep having the conversation. But yeah, Sneha, it looks like you have been involved in different aspects of Metagov for many, like for a few years now, which is so cool to see. And yeah, I would love to chat and hear more about how you've like navigated and made sense of the space and the different projects. So it's so cool to connect here. And thank you so much, Sujith, again for your presentation. And yeah, I'll close this out. Thank you all for the time and excited about all the possibilities and collaborations to come. Have a great rest of all of your days.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank
Thanks
you
for your
so much
input.
for coming and spending time with us.
My pleasure. Thanks. It's been an honor.
Onward.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.